A battered K9 bursts into a police station, dragging a bleeding little girl on his back. Officers freeze. Within minutes, the dog is barking wildly, leading them back into the woods. What they uncover sparks a federal investigation and reveals a horror that changes everything they thought they knew. The morning had started like any other at the precinct. No one could have predicted how quickly everything would change, how silence would soon swallow the room whole. It began with a scratching at the glass entrance, faint at first, barely noticeable beneath the chatter. But then came a deep, panicked bark, sharp, urgent. Officer Reynolds looked up from his desk. "Is someone's K9 loose?" he muttered, standing and moving toward the door. The other officers turned curiously, following behind him. The automatic doors slid open, and what they saw stopped them cold. A large German shepherd, blood smeared across his coat, limped into the station, his breathing ragged, eyes wild. But it wasn't just his condition that made jaws drop. Draped across his back was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, unconscious, bruised, and covered in dirt and blood. Her arms hung limp around his neck. Her face was pale and streaked with dried tears. The room froze. "Oh my God," someone whispered. The shepherd staggered forward, refusing to collapse, as if every ounce of strength in his body was devoted to getting her through those doors. His legs trembled, his paws slid slightly on the tile, but still, he pushed on until he reached the center of the room and finally dropped to his belly, panting heavily. The girl slid gently to the floor. Reynolds and 2 other officers rushed forward, kneeling beside the child. "She's alive," he said quickly, checking her pulse. "Weak, but alive. Call paramedics, now." The room erupted into controlled chaos. Officers shouted into radios, cleared space for medics, and tried to calm the frantic, injured dog who growled instinctively as strangers approached the girl. But then he stopped. The shepherd looked at Reynolds, eyes locking onto his, and barked, just once. It wasn't a cry of fear, it was a call to action, urgent, demanding. He pushed himself upright, staggering on his wounded leg, and limped toward the door. He looked back at the officers, barking again, louder this time. Then he nosed the door and looked back once more. "He's trying to get us to follow him," Reynolds realized aloud. "This isn't over." Another officer nodded. "Wherever he came from, there's more to this. He's not just running on instinct, he's leading us." Reynolds rose to his feet, grabbing his vest. "Then let's go. 2 units with me now." The K9 barked again, urgent, spinning once near the door. The girl was being tended to by medics, but the officers now had 2 missions: protect her and find out what this dog was trying so hard to reveal. What they didn't know was that the shepherd had already done more than anyone imagined. He hadn't just rescued a girl, he was about to expose something far darker than they had ever dealt with before. And the clock was ticking. Paramedics worked quickly, moving the unconscious girl onto a stretcher as officers cleared the lobby. Her small frame looked even smaller beneath the oxygen mask. Her pink dress, once bright, was now torn and stained with mud and dried blood. Bruises marred her arms and legs, and her wrists bore faint marks, as if she'd been bound. One paramedic gently brushed her hair back, wincing at the grime and small cuts along her scalp. "She's dehydrated, possibly concussed," he said, snapping the vitals monitor into place. "But she's stable, barely. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." The room buzzed with energy, but no one missed the way her fingers curled slightly when they tried to remove her hand from the dog's collar. Even unconscious, she clung to him. The German shepherd, despite his own injuries, refused to lie down. His leg was clearly wounded, blood matted his fur around the hip, but he stood stubbornly near the stretcher, his body angled protectively. Every time someone touched the girl, his ears perked and his eyes narrowed, watching with silent warning. He was battered, bleeding, and exhausted, but nothing would make him leave her side. Sergeant Mark Dwyer stepped forward, kneeling beside the shepherd. "Easy, buddy," he said softly, extending a hand. The dog's nose twitched. He let out a low growl, but didn't bite. Slowly, Mark placed his hand on the dog's head, gently stroking behind his ears. "You brought her to us. We're going to help her, but now, we need your help too." One of the officers read the K9's collar tag. "His name's Echo," he said. "No department label, no handler listed." That caught everyone off guard. A dog this trained, this intelligent, he had to belong to someone. But there were no records, no microchip ping in the system. It was as if Echo had come from nowhere. Mark narrowed his eyes. He didn't just show up. He's trained, highly. Look at how he responded under pressure. Someone raised this dog for work. He turned to Reynolds. You think he escaped from something? Or someone? Reynolds nodded grimly. Or was used for something. The girl stirred on the stretcher, letting out a soft whimper. Everyone turned, her eyes fluttered, her lips moving. The medic leaned in. Shh. You're safe now. We've got you. She murmured something again, too faint to hear. Then her body went still again, slipping into unconsciousness. Echo let out a soft, guttural sound, half growl, half whimper. His body pressed against the stretcher as if to guard her, even from the hands trying to save her. Mark looked at the scene and shook his head slowly. Whatever they've been through, it was hell, but this dog got her out. No one knew where they had come from. No one knew who had hurt them. But one thing was now certain. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something bigger, and Echo wasn't done leading them yet. The sirens outside wailed as the ambulance doors slammed shut. The little girl was en route to county medical, escorted by 2 patrol cars. Officers stood in silence as the vehicle pulled away, watching until the flashing lights disappeared down the street. But inside the station, the storm had only just begun. Phones rang non-stop. Dispatch relayed updates from the hospital, while forensics and field units were scrambled into action. Mark Dwyer, now leading the response, stood in the center of the chaos, surrounded by officers, radios, and open laptops. Check every missing persons report from the last 3 months, he ordered, especially abductions under age 10. Run facial scans if you have to. Behind him, Echo paced anxiously near the lobby window, his gait uneven, his injured leg dragging slightly. A vet had been called, but the dog refused care. He snapped gently at anyone who tried to separate him from the stretcher or clean his wound. His eyes never stopped scanning the door, his ears twitching at every sound. It was clear. He wasn't done yet. A tech from the evidence room hurried in, holding a sealed bag. Sir, this was found in the girl's waistband. Looks like a scrap of paper, handwritten. Mark took the bag, carefully unfolding it. On the crumpled paper were 3 words scrawled in shaky pencil. They have others. The room fell quiet. Mark stared at the note. This wasn't random, he muttered. She didn't escape alone. Echo brought her out, but someone else is still there. He turned to the gathered officers. This is now a potential human trafficking case. Get Homeland on the line. I want eyes from every agency. If this girl and Echo got out, we need to know what they got out of. Detective Rachel Lynn, one of the station's best, approached with her tablet. Sir, I ran facial recognition. We've got a partial match. Missing girl, Amelia Torres, age 7, reported missing 2 weeks ago, 3 towns over. Disappeared during a family camping trip. No leads until now. She paused. If this is her, she's the lucky one. Mark clenched his jaw. Let's make sure she's not the only one. Suddenly, Echo barked, short and sharp. Everyone turned. He was at the door again, pawing at the ground, looking back at the officers, barking again. He's trying to go, someone whispered. He wants us to follow. Mark grabbed his vest. Then gear up. Echo's the only one who knows where this started, and if he's leading us, there's no time to waste. The room burst into motion. Radios buzzed, vests were strapped on, weapons holstered, flashlights checked. Whatever lay ahead, they knew one thing for sure. This dog had brought them a message, and that message was a warning. The clock was ticking, and Echo wasn't just a survivor. He was a witness to something too horrifying to ignore. Echo had never been trained for this. Not exactly. He wasn't part of the current department, had no official handler on record, no badge number. But the way he moved, the discipline in his body, the focus in his stare, it was clear he had once been part of something. A K-9 with history, a past nobody knew yet. But whatever training he'd had, instinct was now his compass. When the officers opened the precinct door, he lunged forward, limping hard on his injured leg but refusing to stop. He paused only to glance back, barking once, waiting for them to follow. Then he took off, slow at first, then faster. Every bit of energy left in his battered body pushing him forward through the streets. Sergeant Dwyer and a small team followed closely in marked units, headlights cutting through early morning fog. Echo turned sharply into a narrow alley, forcing them to stop and pursue on foot. "He's not leading us anywhere random," Dwyer called over his shoulder. "He's tracking. Watch him." They crossed parking lots, jumped curbs, passed beneath broken fences. Echo limped through mud and weeds, stopping every few yards to sniff the ground or bark at a direction before pushing on again. Sweat trickled down the officers' faces as adrenaline grew with each step. They were no longer just chasing leads. They were following a dog who knew the truth. At one point, Echo collapsed. His back leg buckled, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Officer Lynn knelt beside him. "We should carry him," she said. But before she could lift him, Echo growled, not in anger, but defiance. He staggered back to his feet, his head raised high. His eyes said it all. "Not yet. I'm not done." They continued through an overgrown field until Echo stopped abruptly at the edge of the woods. He sniffed the air, barked once, then stood completely still. His tail was stiff, his breathing shallow. Something had changed. Something familiar to him was close. Dwyer raised his fist, signaling the others to hold position. "He's found something." Echo took a few steps into the tree line and paused. The wind shifted. The sound of rustling leaves gave way to eerie silence. He turned slowly to face the officers, then barked sharply and bolted into the woods. The team rushed in behind him, flashlights slicing through the dense undergrowth. Branches snapped beneath their boots. Bugs buzzed through the thick air. But Echo never slowed. He cut through the brush like he was racing against time itself. And deep in the trees, almost too far to hear, came a different sound. A faint metallic clank. A creak. Like a door opening. Or closing. Dwyer's radio crackled. "We're getting close," he said, eyes sharp. Because whatever Echo had survived was just ahead. And they were about to step into the darkness he had barely escaped from. The forest swallowed them in a silence that felt unnatural. No bird song, no distant rustling. Just breath, boots, and the determined shuffle of a wounded dog leading a team of armed officers deeper into the unknown. Echo's ears stayed perked, his nose low to the earth. His pace never faltered, not even when the underbrush turned thick, or when the trail vanished beneath moss and debris. Sergeant Dwyer scanned the area with his flashlight, sweeping left and right. "He's not lost," he muttered. "He's tracking. Stay tight." The team moved in a line formation, weapons down but ready. It wasn't a question of if something was waiting at the end of this trail, it was what. Echo led them past fallen trees and clusters of brush, through a dry creek bed, and then veered right toward a steep incline. He hesitated at the base, looking up, then began climbing, slowly, favoring his leg but refusing to stop. Officer Lynn offered to carry him, but again, he growled softly and pushed on. He was leading them somewhere specific. Every movement had meaning. Halfway up, the scent hit them. Foul, metallic, familiar to the worst calls they'd ever answered. Blood. The kind that's too fresh for comfort. Dwyer raised a hand and crouched. "Everyone quiet," he whispered. Echo stood just ahead, at the top of the slope, frozen. His tail pointed straight. His body trembled. Not from fear, but readiness. The officers crept up behind him and reached the ridge, then stopped cold. Below them was a clearing. Hidden by trees and elevation, it was invisible from the road or air. In the middle of the clearing sat a dilapidated shack. Rotting wood, shuttered windows. A rusty generator hummed faintly nearby. But what sent chills down their spines were the cages. 4 of them, lined up behind the shack, and 2 of them were occupied. "Dear God," Lynn whispered. "Children, alive, frail." One was sitting upright, clutching a blanket. The other lay still. Echo barked sharply but didn't move. He was signaling them, telling them this was it. This was where it had all happened. Dwyer immediately called it in. "This is Unit 4. We have a confirmed trafficking site. 2 live juveniles in sight. Backup and medevac needed. I repeat, this is a live situation." He turned to his team. "We move on my count." The team descended the ridge, silently spreading out to surround the shack. Echo stayed at the top, watching, waiting. But his mission was almost complete. He had brought them here. And now, others would finish what he had started. The officers moved in formation, covering the doors and windows. Dwyer's voice rang clear and sharp. "Police! Come out with your hands up!" There was no answer, just the soft creak of floorboards and the faint sound of footsteps within. Echo's trail had brought them to the mouth of something evil, and they were about to open it wide. The clearing felt frozen in time, silent, grim, and heavy with secrets. Sergeant Dwyer held his stance, one hand up in signal, the other on his weapon. His eyes scanned the shack, its walls warped and splintered, the roof sagging like a structure barely holding together. And yet, inside those frail walls, something sick had survived, thrived. A low creak echoed from within. Another step, then silence again. The air was so still, it buzzed in their ears. "Lynn, take the left flank," Dwyer ordered in a whisper. "Mendez, cover the back. Wait for my go." As the team spread out, Echo remained at the ridge, watching with haunting stillness. His body trembled now, not in fear, but as if willing them to move faster, to finish what he started. He could smell it, the rot, the blood, the scent of fear soaked into the walls below. His ears twitched, nose flaring. Something was still inside, watching. Dwyer gave the nod. Officers moved like shadows, boots silent over pine needles. The front door was barely hanging on its hinges. Dwyer reached for it, gave a small push. It creaked open slowly, revealing darkness. No lights, just the musty stench of unwashed cloth, rusted metal, and damp earth. "Clear left," Lynn whispered from inside. "Clear right," Mendez echoed. Then from the far corner of the room came a whisper, weak, trembling. "Help!" Flashlight snapped toward the voice. A boy, maybe 10, curled in a corner, wrapped in a torn bedsheet, eyes wide and sunken. Dwyer rushed over, kneeling. "We've got another one! He's alive!" The boy flinched, shrinking away. "Don't let them hear me," he murmured. "They'll come back." "They're not coming back," Dwyer said, his voice low but steady. "You're safe now?" Just as he said it, Lynn's voice cut in over the radio. "We found a trap door at the rear of the shack. It's chained, looks recently used." Dwyer's expression darkened. "Hold perimeter. Don't open it until I give the word." Outside, medics had already reached the 2 cages. One child, barely responsive, was lifted out and wrapped in thermal blankets. The other, frightened but stable, kept asking, "Where's the dog? The dog that helped us?" When Echo limped into view, both children reached out instinctively. He didn't hesitate. He lowered himself at their feet, tail thumping once in recognition. Back inside, Dwyer and Lynn studied the trap door. The lock was old, but freshly refastened. Scratches lined the frame, frantic, recent. Someone had left in a hurry, or someone was still down there. "Get bolt cutters," Dwyer said grimly. "We're going in." Outside, helicopters began to circle overhead. Homeland had arrived. The scene in the woods wasn't just a rescue site, it was evidence. The air hung with the weight of crimes committed in the shadows, now exposed by a dog who had refused to stay silent. Whatever lay beneath that trapdoor was about to face the light. The trapdoor groaned as the bolt cutters snapped the chain loose. Dust floated upward as the wood creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A wave of stale air rose from below, thick, damp, and tinged with something foul. Dwyer shone his flashlight down the steps, jaw tightening. "Whoever built this," he said quietly, "didn't want it found." Officer Lynn descended first, her boots echoing on the old planks. Dwyer followed, weapon drawn, every muscle tensed. The staircase twisted downward for nearly 20 feet before opening into a low-ceilinged basement. It was cold. Stone walls lined the perimeter. Rusted pipes dripped from the ceiling, and against the far wall, chained to the ground, was a third cage. Empty. But beside it sat something else. A crate of supplies, half-eaten food, syringes, rope, and taped to the wall above it, Polaroids, dozens of them, faces, children, some smiling, most terrified, each with a name scrawled in red ink across the bottom. Dwyer felt his stomach turn. "This wasn't just a hideout," Lynn said, her voice shaking. "It was a hub, a waypoint." They moved cautiously through the room, uncovering evidence as they went. A map, routes, tunnels marked beneath the forest. Several black duffel bags filled with burner phones, keys, even cash. Whoever had operated here wasn't working alone. This was part of something larger, coordinated, hidden in plain sight. "Get forensics down here," Dwyer radioed, "and call the feds. This is bigger than state level." Back outside, the sun had risen fully, but the horror unfolding below the shack darkened the air. Echo sat near the medical tents, bandaged but alert. His eyes never left the trees, as if he still expected something to emerge, something unfinished. Margaret, the child services rep who'd arrived on site, crouched beside the kids, gently wrapping a blanket around the youngest. "They said Echo brought them food in the night," she whispered to one of the medics, "that he kept barking to scare off someone who tried to come down. He was their guard dog," the medic murmured, "and their rescuer." One of the rescued girls pointed toward the shack. "He got in through the back wall, through a hole, then he chewed the ropes. He stayed with us." She paused, voice shaking. "Until he smelled someone coming. Then he took Amelia and ran." That name, Amelia, confirmed it. The girl from the station. She'd been the one Echo had carried on his back, through woods and roads, bleeding and unconscious, straight to the police. Back in the basement, Lynn stood in front of a steel cabinet. She opened it slowly, revealing dozens of files, names, photos, dates, victims, a record of trafficking, of systematic horror. Dwyer's voice was low and grim. "This isn't just evidence, it's a case file, and it stretches farther than this shack." What Echo had uncovered wasn't just a crime scene, it was a gateway, a trail leading to something much bigger. And the storm was just beginning. Because now there were names, and now there would be justice. Back at the precinct, the evidence room was no longer quiet. Files were stacked in growing towers, photos pinned to boards, digital maps glowing on monitors. The rescue at the shack had triggered a full-force operation. Now, every officer, agent, and analyst in the room worked with one goal: connecting the horrors from the woods to real names, real families, and real pain. Detective Rachel Lynn sat cross-legged on the floor beside a whiteboard covered in missing persons cases. She was cross-referencing photos from the basement's cabinet with open cases reported across 5 states. Her fingers moved quickly over the tablet. "We've got matches," she called out. "At least 6 of them, kids missing from Florida, Tennessee, Arkansas, and 2 from our own county, all reported within the past 4 months. Mark Dwyer leaned over her shoulder, his jaw tight. "What about Amelia Torres?" Lynn nodded. "Confirmed, it's her. And we found a photo of her in that cabinet, taken the day after she went missing based on her clothes." She tapped the image on screen. A small girl with a forced smile, eyes hollow, hands clenched behind her back. Dwyer turned away, unable to look for long. Elsewhere in the room, tech analyst Joel Myers pulled up a digital map with pins connecting abduction sites. "It's a pattern," he said. "Every missing child in that cabinet disappeared near state parks or isolated towns. Places with limited surveillance, low law enforcement coverage." He clicked another tab. "And here's where it gets worse. Each of those areas had sightings of an unregistered white van days before the children went missing. Same vehicle description, no plates. Margaret, the child services rep, entered quietly holding a small notebook, the one Amelia had scribbled in when she regained consciousness at the hospital. "She gave us names," she said softly. 2 other children still in that place, and a man. She called him the one with the cane. Said he was the leader." Dwyer nodded slowly. "That's who Echo was chasing. The man who ran when the dog grabbed Amelia and fled." He pointed to the map. "He's not in the wind, not yet. These people are careful, but they're methodical, which means if we follow the pattern, we'll find their next target, and we'll find him." Echo, resting on a padded bed in the corner, lifted his head. Though bandaged and weak, his eyes remained sharp, watching, waiting. His ears perked slightly at the sound of Amelia's name. He couldn't speak, but everyone in that room knew. He understood. Rachel tapped her screen again. "One more thing," she said. "There's a property in the next county, abandoned on paper, but recently purchased under a shell company. Surveillance shows movement, late-night activity, could be nothing, or it could be the next site." Dwyer stood straight. "Then we don't wait. because Echo hadn't risked everything just to save one girl. He'd opened the door to something far bigger, and they were about to walk straight through it. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Pale sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting gentle stripes across Amelia's face. Her small body lay still beneath a warm blanket, IV lines snaking from her arms, a bandage wrapped around her forehead. The doctors said she was stable, physically, but they didn't know if she'd speak. Trauma this deep sometimes sealed children into silence. Margaret sat beside her bed, gently stroking her hand. The girl hadn't moved in hours. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, whispering updates. But Margaret stayed. She'd been through this before, with other children rescued from unthinkable places. And she knew it was always the quiet ones who carried the loudest memories. Then, just as the clock ticked past noon, Amelia stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, her fingers twitched. Margaret leaned forward. "Amelia?" she whispered. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" The girl's lips parted slightly. Her throat was dry, but she formed a word, barely audible. "Echo." Margaret smiled softly. "He's okay. He's safe. He brought you here." The girl's eyes opened, wide and blinking into the light. She looked around the room, panicked at first, then relaxed as her eyes landed on Margaret's kind face. She whispered again, this time clearer. "He saved me." Across town, at the precinct, the radio crackled. "The girl's awake," came the message from the hospital. "She's talking." Within minutes, Sergeant Dwyer and Detective Lynn were on their way. When they arrived, Amelia was sitting up, propped by pillows, her hands wrapped tightly around a small plush animal the nurse had given her. Her voice was weak, but her mind was sharp. She remembered everything. "He came at night," she said, describing the man with the cane. "He had keys. He picked which ones of us got food, which ones didn't. Echo came through the wall, the hole behind the heater. He chewed the ropes off my hands. He stayed with me all night." Her voice cracked. "When the bad man came back, Echo attacked him. I couldn't walk, so he carried me." Tears slipped down Margaret's face as she listened. Amelia looked down at the stuffed animal in her hands. "He was hurt. He bled the whole way, but he didn't stop." She turned to Dwyer. "Are the others safe?" He knelt beside the bed. "2 more kids were rescued. They're getting help right now. Because of you. Because of Echo." The girl blinked, eyes heavy with exhaustion and relief. "He's not just a dog," she said. "He knew what to do. He knew where to go." Dwyer placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "And now, it's our turn. You led us to something big. We're going after the rest." For the first time since she was found, Amelia smiled. It was faint, fragile, but real. Echo had carried her to safety, but now her voice would carry justice to those still trapped in the dark. The conference room at the precinct was packed. Officers, detectives, federal agents, and analysts all stood around the long table, staring at maps, photos, and marked reports. But when Sergeant Dwyer entered holding a digital recorder, the room fell still. He placed it on the table and pressed play. "This," he said, "is from Amelia Torres. Less than an hour ago." The girl's voice came through the speaker, soft, shaky, but clear. "There's a basement. That's where they kept the other kids. There's a man with a cane. He's in charge. Everyone else does what he says. He talks about deliveries, about keeping people quiet. He said no one would ever find us." Murmurs rose in the room. One agent leaned in. "She's describing a trafficking ring, organized, structured, and mobile." Another analyst nodded. She confirmed multiple drop sites. One she described matches that Shell property we're already watching. The audio continued. There were cameras in the ceiling. The man with the cane said everything was sent up the ladder. I don't know what that means. But he got angry when the laptop stopped working. That's when he hit Tommy, and that's when Echo came back. Echo's name made several people glance toward the side of the room, where the K9 rested quietly on a blanket. Bandaged and exhausted, he still kept one eye open, ears alert. No one questioned it anymore. He was part of this team. Rachel Lynn stood and pointed at the screen. If we cross-reference Amelia's descriptions with what we found in the shack basement, we're dealing with something interstate. Not just a safe house, but a distribution point, possibly even a remote command center. An agent from Homeland leaned forward. "This is bigger than we thought." She mentioned the word delivery multiple times. If there's a pattern, if there's a schedule, we could intercept the next movement. Dwyer nodded. Then we don't wait. We set up surveillance on that Shell property immediately. Full federal coordination. I want that place locked down before sundown. The youngest officer in the room raised a hand. What about the man with the cane? The room went quiet again. Dwyer glanced at Echo. We're working on it, but make no mistake, he's not hiding forever. Back at the hospital, Amelia lay curled under her blanket, eyes wide open despite the medication. Margaret sat beside her, reading a book aloud. But Amelia wasn't listening. Her thoughts were still in that basement, still with the others who hadn't escaped, still waiting, still afraid. She turned to Margaret. Do you think they'll find him? The one who gave the orders? Margaret took her hand gently. I know they will. Because now the enemy wasn't hiding in silence anymore. He had a name, a voice. And thanks to a little girl and a wounded K-9, the world had finally started listening. Agent Elijah Grant had seen things, enough to know that evil rarely looked like the monsters in movies. It wore clean shoes, drove silent vans, filed paperwork under fake names. It didn't need to scream because silence was more efficient. But something about the Amelia Torres case struck him differently. It wasn't just the brutality, it was the precision. And the K-9. That dog's behavior wasn't random. It was tactical, strategic. Someone trained him well. Grant sat alone in his Washington office, Amelia's voice playing again through his laptop speakers. The more he listened, the more convinced he became. This wasn't a lone wolf operation. This was a coordinated network. And the man with the cane, likely more than just a local threat. The kind of figure who operates with connections, reach, and protection. He picked up his encrypted phone and dialed. Director McNeil, he said when the line clicked. We've got a verified link between a trafficking ring in southern counties and at least 3 missing federal witnesses. There's movement, active movement. I'm requesting authorization for a coordinated multi-agency raid, tonight. The voice on the other end was slow but certain. You're sure this is the one? Grant's eyes landed on the image of Echo, bloodied, bandaged, standing guard outside the hospital room door. I'm sure. And if we wait, we lose them. Within the hour, the green light came through. At the command center, everything snapped into motion. Helicopters were fueled, SWAT teams assembled, field agents loaded gear with urgency sharpened by fury. This wasn't just protocol anymore. It was personal. A child had spoken, and her words held coordinates. A dog had walked through fire to lead them there. Now it was time to finish what he started. Grant arrived at the local precinct just before sundown. Dwyer met him at the door, handing over an evidence folder, thick with new intel. Amelia's story lines up with everything we pulled from the site, Dwyer said. We've got routes, burner phone activity, and satellite feed shows. Movement at the Shell property as of 30 minutes ago. 2 men, one matching the girl's description, tall, limp, cane in hand. Grant flipped through the photographs, then closed the folder. We move tonight. Dwyer looked him in the eye. You think this is it? The hub? Grant nodded once. If it's not, it's close enough to rattle the ones above it. We hit them hard, we shake the chain, and we see who else falls. In the corner, Echo watched them quietly. His ears twitched, his body rising slowly from the blanket. He limped forward, pausing beside the door. Dwyer looked at him. He knows? Grant crouched down, placing a hand on the dog's back. Then let's listen. Because sometimes, justice doesn't start with a badge or a courtroom. Sometimes, it starts with a dog who refuses to stop running. The night sky hung low and heavy, moonlight slicing through drifting clouds as black SUVs and armored vans rolled down a remote dirt road. Engines were silent, headlights off. Only night vision goggles lit the world now, casting everything in ghostly green. Inside the lead vehicle, Agent Elijah Grant checked his watch. 23:47. The raid would begin in 13 minutes. On a digital tablet beside him glowed the satellite feed of the target property, an abandoned farmhouse registered under a fake LLC. But heat sensors revealed a different story. 3 bodies inside, 1 pacing, 2 stationary, one of them with a limp. Targets are still in place, the tech confirmed over comms. Motion in the northwest room. Back door appears unsecured. Grant looked across at Sergeant Dwyer, suited in full tactical gear. We go in quiet, no mistakes. The man with the cane doesn't get away this time. Outside, the teams moved into formation. 2 from Homeland, 1 from local SWAT. Drone units hovered overhead, capturing every angle. Sharp instructions crackled in earpieces. Position confirmed. Entry points aligned. Then, from the rear vehicle came a soft rustle. Echo. Bandaged and limping, he had stood up inside the transport cage. His eyes locked forward. His nose twitched violently. And then, suddenly he barked. Once. Sharp. Focused. Grant and Dwyer turned simultaneously. "He knows something," Dwyer said. "He smells him." They exchanged a look. "Open the cage," Grant ordered. "No handler," someone warned. "He doesn't need one," Grant said. "Let him go." Echo leapt from the vehicle with surprising speed, bolting into the shadows along the west flank of the house. His body low, movements sharp. He wasn't wounded anymore, not in his mind. He was hunting. At 23:59, the final signal was given. At 0000, the doors blew open. Flashbangs thudded through the air. Lights erupted. Shadows scattered. Officers moved in swift trained silence. Inside, the farmhouse was chaos. Papers, computers, locked cabinets, a mattress in the corner, and near the center room, a tall man spun toward the sound, limping, cane in hand. "Federal agents, down!" He turned to run, but Echo struck first. From the darkness, the dog launched himself forward, teeth bared, tackling the man with full force. The cane clattered to the floor. The man screamed, struggling under Echo's grip. Blood darkened his sleeve, but he was down. "Target restrained," a voice shouted. Officers stormed in, securing the perimeter, zip-tying 2 other men hiding in a makeshift back room filled with documents and laptops. The raid was over in 6 minutes. Echo stood panting beside the man with the cane, eyes locked on him until agents took him away. Then he turned and walked slowly back to Grant, collapsing at his feet. Grant knelt, resting a hand on the dog's head. "You got him." Because this wasn't just a mission. It was personal. And the dog who ran through fire had just brought evil to its knees. The farmhouse looked empty from above, quiet, still, forgotten by the world. But beneath the rotting floorboards and creaking stairs, a locked hatch hid something far more sinister. As the cuffs clicked shut around the man with the cane, Agent Grant turned toward the floorboards. "Search the basement," he ordered. "Tear it apart if you have to." SWAT officers pried open the wooden planks in the back room, revealing a recessed metal trapdoor nearly buried under piles of dirty laundry and stacked furniture. 2 men worked together to crank the rusted bolts free. The door groaned open, releasing a gust of putrid, stale air. The smell was overwhelming: mold, rot, and something worse. Flashlights pierced the darkness as the agents descended the narrow stairs. The air grew colder with each step. Below, the basement was a concrete cell. Low ceiling, wet walls, a single flickering bulb hanging by a cord. Chains lined one wall. Mattresses, if they could be called that, lay soaked with stains in the corners. In one crate, a collection of small shoes, torn clothing, and blankets folded in organized rows. Dwyer's voice echoed through the comms. "It's another holding site, and it's been active." At the back of the room, locked inside a cage barely larger than a dog kennel, was a young boy, eyes wide, silent, too weak to speak. An agent rushed forward, prying open the cage as gently as possible. The boy didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply blinked in the light and whispered, "Are you the ones the dog brought?" It was all they needed to hear. Moments later, the boy was wrapped in a thermal blanket and carried out in Agent Grant's arms. He was shaking but conscious. Outside, medics rushed to assess him. One turned to the team. "He's severely malnourished but stable. Another few days in there." She didn't finish the sentence. The other officers continued sweeping the room. They found more photographs, more journals, ledger books of movement dates, payment records, even coded names. It was a treasure trove of evidence, but more than that. It was proof. Proof of a network. Proof of faces once thought lost. Proof of stories now ready to be told. Back at the transport, Echo watched as the boy was brought out. He stood, limping forward, tail gently wagging. The boy's eyes lit up. "That's him," he said, voice stronger now. "That's the one who barked through the wall. He found her. He found Amelia." Dwyer knelt beside Echo, resting a hand on his back. "You did it," he murmured. "You didn't just survive, you led us here." And in that moment, with the lights from emergency trucks flashing red and blue across the trees, they realized something profound. Echo hadn't stumbled into the station by accident. He had followed instinct, yes, but also purpose, determination, memory. In a world where monsters tried to stay hidden, a dog found their basement and tore the door wide open. The morning sun rose slowly over the town, casting soft light across rooftops, parking lots, and the worn steps of the police station. It was quiet now. The helicopters were gone, the sirens had faded, the chaos had passed. But inside, the ripple effects of Echo's actions were still unfolding. Lives reclaimed, names cleared, and a network shattered by the one creature no one had seen coming. Amelia sat on a bench in the station's front lobby, dressed in fresh clothes and holding a steaming cup of cocoa. Her legs swung gently off the edge, and her eyes never left the door. She wasn't waiting for answers anymore. She was waiting for him. Then it happened. The glass doors slid open, and there he was. Bandaged, limping, but standing tall, Echo stepped through the doorway beside Sergeant Dwyer. His eyes locked on Amelia immediately, ears perking, tail wagging low and slow. The moment he saw her, the pain in his body seemed to vanish. He moved faster than he should have, closing the distance until his head rested gently against her chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight. Neither moved for a long time. Officers nearby watched in silence. Some smiled, some wiped their eyes. Because this wasn't just a reunion, it was a symbol, a full circle. The girl who couldn't speak a word at first now found her strength in the presence of the one who carried her through fire. "He didn't let go," she whispered. "Even when I passed out, he didn't let go." Margaret stepped beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And you didn't give up on him either." Outside the station, cameras were already rolling. News trucks had gathered. Reporters spoke into microphones, calling it a miracle, a once-in-a-lifetime story of courage and survival. But inside the building, the truth was far simpler. It wasn't about headlines. It was about two souls who had found each other in the darkest place and brought each other back to the light. Agent Grant entered just as the moment unfolded. He knelt beside Echo, scratching behind the dog's ear. "You rewrote every rule," he said softly. "No badge, no partner, no handler, just heart." He stood and turned to Dwyer. "There'll be hearings, indictments, follow-ups. But the big picture, that ring's broken. That man with the cane, he's facing federal time. We've got enough evidence to light up half the country." Dwyer nodded, glancing at Echo. And it all started with a dog who refused to turn away. Later that afternoon, a plaque was mounted inside the station entrance. It bore a simple engraving. In honor of Echo, for running toward danger, for carrying hope, and for saving those no one else could reach. Because while others turned blind eyes, one K9 and one little girl refused to stay silent, and the world will never forget it. News of the raid spread like wildfire. By midday, the story had made national headlines. K9, dog leads police to child trafficking ring, scrolled across televisions in every airport, coffee shop, and living room. Online, photos of Echo and Amelia, her arms wrapped around his neck, his eyes calm and watchful, went viral. The world didn't just read the story, it felt it. And for a brief moment, headlines weren't about politics or disaster. They were about a wounded dog who had defied every odd to save a little girl and expose something horrific. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #Echo the hero, #K9 justice, and because of one dog trended across platforms. Artists painted murals of Echo. Journalists requested interviews. Animal rights groups called for national honors. But more than all of that, something deeper began to shift. People started asking questions about trafficking cases that went cold, about missing children never found. And in the heart of the noise, survivors began coming forward, some with memories, others with names. Echo hadn't just led the police to a basement. He had sparked a conversation the world had ignored for far too long. At the precinct, Echo sat quietly beside the front desk, a makeshift badge clipped to his collar. Visitors streamed in all day, officers from other cities, families of the rescued. veterans who recognized something in Echo's eyes. Amelia remained at his side every moment she could. She'd begun talking more now, smiling, even laughing. And when someone asked her why she thought Echo had picked her, she simply said, "He knew I needed him." Washington took notice. A letter arrived on official White House stationery. It was read aloud by Agent Grant at a small ceremony in the precinct courtyard. For his bravery, loyalty, and unwavering instinct to protect the innocent, Echo will be awarded the Medal of Valor, making him the first unassigned K-9 in U.S. history to receive it. The crowd erupted in cheers. Even Echo barked once, as if he understood. But the celebration was never about the spotlight. It was about remembrance. At the hospital, the rescued children began to recover. Their names, once buried in reports, were now being spoken again. Amelia, now safely placed with relatives, began writing letters to each of them. "You're not alone anymore," one letter read. "Because of Echo, we're all found." In the quiet moments, Echo would still limp. His injuries hadn't vanished, but no one saw the limp as weakness. It was a badge of honor, a reminder of the road he walked alone, with a girl barely breathing on his back and a truth the world hadn't wanted to see. And long after the headlines faded, the story endured, not as a one-day miracle, but as a movement. Because one dog chose not to run from darkness. He walked straight into it and carried someone out. And the world finally followed.